My name is Paul Choiniere, the editorial page editor at The Day, and I'm joined again by David Collins, our news columnist. And we wanted to talk today about the start of the legislative session and specifically about the Governor Malloy's budget proposal, which, from my perspective at least, offered some pretty dramatic changes. I saw a quote from Senator Boucher, a Republican, who said that she felt the governor was speaking from the Republican playbook, which I think was an appropriate comment, because we had the governor calling for nearly 6% cuts across the board in non-essential services, reduction in the labor force, which he said may be more than 1,000, and his budget director, Ben Barnes, said could be several thousand. So there seemed to be a clear message that Connecticut had to start doing things differently, and the budget needed to be trimmed back. What were some of your impressions, David?
Yeah, I had the same. Certainly, the impression that it's sort of a new Governor Malloy. The sense of really tackling these tough issues, not raising taxes, cutting spending. Cutting entitlements for state workers, reducing the state workforce. These are all kind of new initiatives, I think, from the Malloy administration. And I think even the Republicans seemed a little bit kind of taken aback yesterday and kind of adjusting to the new reality of these being the initiatives of the governor. But it's an interesting start. It'll be an interesting session.
Yeah, and the governor, in addition to proposing some significant cuts in state spending, he also proposed changing the way Connecticut does its budgeting. One thing he would like to do is to collapse some of the line items in the budget, which he says will give his administration more leeway to find ways to make government more efficient, to find places to save money. But what the legislature is pushing back on, saying that could usurp their authority to sort of dictate where the purse string should be held in the legislature. So that should be interesting to see how that plays out. And he also wants to get away from what he calls current services budgeting, where you assume that the budget from the last year will be the budget for the new year, and you just add on the cost of inflation, you add on the cost of new contracts. And he wants to go to something more akin to zero-based budgeting, where you sort of start from scratch and look at what your core services are and what you can afford to do. So that's going to be a big fight. And David, you mentioned the pensions. We heard a lot about that issue, which is a big problem for Connecticut, and the governor seems to be zeroing in on that as well.
Yeah, the pensions are certainly this long-range, really calamitous problem for the state, and for the governor to now begin to really address it seriously, and of course the treasurer and the comptroller are too, is a really good sign. I think it must be very worrisome for the unions, because it was the first time I've heard the governor really talk about pension entitlements in a really realistic way, and he talked about what the future of whether or not there will be defined benefit pension plans for state workers, and that seemed to be a real kind of gauntlet for the unions, and of course the reduction in the state workforce too. So this was, I think it was sort of a milestone moment in the Malloy administration, and it reminds me too of the sort of the arc. This is a governor who took office saying that we'd have shared sacrifice, that taxes would rise, and that the unions would take a cut, and that there would be a balance and a mix of sort of shared pain. And since then, though, it's really been kind of more taxes and fewer cuts, and kind of protecting the unions. So this is a real game changer, I think.
And I think the governor sent the message that he's willing to work with the Republicans. In fact, it may take a coalition, the Republican minority and some fiscally moderate Democrats, in order to push through these kind of cuts. He's definitely going to see some resistance, I think, from the Democratic leadership, who are not so keen on the idea of making those kind of cuts in the labor force. So, I mean, it's an issue that the Day will be following with updates on theday.com. It's going to be a very interesting session to see how it plays out. And to see if the governor backs up, his strong positions on that.
Yeah, there were moments of big applause lines, but there were times when you saw clearly half the room not so enthusiastic about to talk about serious spending cuts and balancing the budget and finishing the budget work before the last day of the session. I didn't see everybody get to their feet on that notion either. So it'll be a really fascinating session so far. It looks like it's going to open up that way.
And it's an election year for the legislature, so factor that in as well. So the day will be following that, and please keep reading your paper and check in on theday.com for updates on it. Thank you.